My name is Julius De Silva. I'm the CEO at QMII, and I'm looking forward to presenting on this webinar, Data, Metrics, and Meaning. Are we measuring what matters? I'm sure there'll be a few folks coming in a few minutes after 11 here. But what really sparked the thought for this webinar? And we're always looking to you as our customer base clients and potential clients always for kind of ideas on what's interesting to you. Because if it's interesting to you, it's interesting to probably 100 other people, right? And what sparked the webinar here was a conversation we had with the client where they were talking about the struggles they were having with identifying good objectives for their management system, right? And they're like, we get all this data and we have so much data we're collecting, but what's really a meaningful KPI that we can set? We're tracking these, and they had like about 20 KPIs they were tracking, but they were not seeing value from the KPIs. And we said, if one can benefit from a small conversation we had with them, I'm sure there are many others that may be able to benefit from it. So as we go through this webinar, we are going to be talking about, what is data and how do we collect it? Why do we collect it? How we should collect it. And we're going to walk through that whole sequence. But as we reach towards the end of the webinar, we're going to leave you with a couple of quick tools that you can take back and immediately implement to kind of assess for yourself whether your KPIs and your objectives that you have set are actually adding value to your system or not. Perhaps you may walk away with saying, with the knowledge of how can we revamp the way we set our KPIs. In fact, there are some organizations that actually have key processes that they have set up for setting and deploying objectives, right? You think, oh, do we need a key process for setting and deploying objectives? But there are organizations and clients we have worked with in the past where we help them set up a process where it's like a cyclical process of continual improvement, is reviewing your objectives and improving them as we go through, right? So the webinar, of course, is provided to you, the audience, for informational purposes only. All participation in this webinar is voluntary, not an indication of endorsement of or commitment to purchase from QMII, right? Um, I used to go over this in detail, but nowadays, in the world we live in, where we're having meetings every 15 minutes and 30 minutes and on the hour, I'm sure most of you are familiar with these controls already. The best way, of course, and least distraction to everyone else is to use the chat box. If you want to throw in a question, a comment, you also have the emoji icons you can use and, the thumbs up and smiley faces. But we have Lisa on the call here, who's our Global Solutions Manager. And I'm sure for the most part, she'll be able to answer most of your questions in the chat. And if she's unable to, then she'll at least bring it to my attention so we can kind of answer that in the Q&A session right at the end of this webinar, right? A couple more slides and just, how to adjust your view if you want a bigger size of screen. You also have a little zoom in, zoom out button if you want to zoom in on the screen itself, etc. And what we're going to cover today is we're going to talk a little bit about QMII. I see a few familiar names over here in the audience. So, you already know us, but for those who don't, we'll talk a little bit about QMII, kind of why we're here. And the meat of the presentation, of course, and the webinar is going to be focused on improving objective governance, right? With a small section right at the end for question and answers, of course. So QMI has been around since 1986. This is where we're completing our 40th year in business, and for the last 40 years, we've provided what we call best in industry process improvement, consulting, auditing, and training. There are many organizations out there that don't even know the breadth or scope of what we do, right? They'll come and say, oh, QMI does 9,001 or 14,001 without really even knowing the breadth of what we do. So sometimes if you have in your management system an issue that you're facing and you're like, is there a solution for this? Just reach out to Lisa and at least ask, no harm in asking, does QMI provide any support or assistance with this? There have been many a time that clients have come to work with us and we have worked with them in consulting in a certain capacity, and then they've chosen another provider because they just weren't aware that we do another aspect or not provide another service. But we're headquartered in Ashburn, Virginia. That being said, we have a global reach, right? We work with clients across the globe and all states within the US. We are 9001 certified. We are a DB, disadvantaged business enterprise, a small business, and we also hold a GSA. I think now it's called like a PSS, Professional Services Schedule, or multiple award schedule, right? So we have a GSA contract in case any of you are in the government contracting realm. But like I was saying, over 22 countries served, and that keeps growing. So we've actually done either consulting in these countries or training or performed audits, some of them on site, some of them remote. But over 1,000 companies served, over 10,000 auditors trained, and we just stopped at 10,000. The number was too large to get down to in detail, right? Here's a few of the clients we have worked with. So, we have worked with many more federal agencies than those listed over here, as well as in the maritime, in the commercial side, we have a lot of maritime clients because that, of course, is one of our key expertises. But we also have from, Fortune 500 companies to small mom and pop shops that are kind of startups, one person, two-person, three-person companies that we work with. And we service the whole gambit and bandwidth of size of companies as need be, right? All you need is the need for a good working management system, and that's where we fit in then, right? When you want someone to help you set that up and set it up well so it sustains over time. So those of you who have sat in on our webinars know there's a few polls coming here. So we have two polls right at the start here, and then in between we'll have a third one, and right at the end we'll have a fourth poll as well, right? So I'm going to open the poll. I usually leave them open for about a minute or so, and once I get a certain percentage of answers in, I will close it out. If you don't see the poll or I close it out before you can answer it, you can always drop something in the chat. Okay. So I'll launch the first one right now. You should see it up there soon. Excellent. As the results are coming in, I see a number of people, primarily the majority of you are either in some sort of a leadership role. And when you're in a leadership role, your role primarily is setting good objectives for your team because that drives the team's performance, right? So you want to be able to set good objectives for your team. And then those of you who are the next biggest group is like the internal auditors, and those who are in the internal auditor capacity need to assess whether the system is working well to meet the objectives as set. But part of your auditing process is also determining if the objectives themselves are being resourced, being planned for, etc. Right? So, and we'll tie it back right towards the end of the webinar. We're talking about those review of the objectives in the management review as required by the various ISO standards. All right, so just a quick look. I think we've got about 70% of the responses in. I'll leave it open just for another 10 seconds and then I'll close it out. All right, very good. And then we are coming to our next poll, which is, when it comes to driving real improvement, how confident are you that your data is telling you the full story, right? So when it comes to driving real improvement, how confident are you that your data is telling you the full story? And we'll weave our webinar to sort of answer this question to some extent. Okay, so it's coming up here, and I believe you can select all that apply in this one. I'll probably leave this open for about 20 seconds more. I know they're a little wordy, but it drives some thought then, right? It requires a little thought before answering. And some of you may say, Julius, why are these so wordy? And I would say because Julius doesn't know how to make some of these things concise, some things just need a few more words to spell it out clearly enough. But what you see over here is a list of things, at least, except for the first four, which is not the first one, sorry, which is not very common. The four that trail there, so options two, three, four, and five, are not uncommon, I would say, right? When we go out to consult with our clients, it's something very common that we get from our clients when we are consulting with them. And I see that the bottom two have the highest percentage kind of, or bottom three rather, split pretty evenly from 25 to 33, 21%, right? Where you're tracking whether actions were completed, but you're not actually determining whether anything improved, right? We see this commonly also for those of you maybe in the government contracting space, right? You see it. So where you may ask, okay, can we get certain number of FTEs? Let's say you want 10 full-time equivalents or 10 butts in the seat, as they say, in on the contract, and you get 10 people, but you may not get productivity, right? But if you ask for productivity, then you'll get productivity, right? So you may be tracking whether you're closing out, and we'll talk about this example up ahead, but are you closing out your CAPAs in 30 days or your corrective actions? And yes, you close out your corrective action 30 days, but is it driving any improvement? That ties into the last poll one here. It says our data satisfies the audit, but doesn't help us make better decisions, right? And different teams are measuring different things. This is as the percentage in the poll states here, it's very, very common. We'll talk about why that happens also, right? Why that happens. Excellent. But those of you answered, thank you very much for providing your answers. So continuing on, why are we here? To understand why objectives fail, right? That's the whole purpose. Like we want to make objectives better. We want to help us drive improvements through the system. So why objectives fail? How can we distinguish outputs from outcomes, right? That means we're tracking and we're getting things done, but it's still not helping us improve, right? How do we distinguish outputs from outcomes, and to apply a systems thinking to define key performance indicators, objectives, targets, goals, whatever you want to call them, right? To apply a systems thinking that drives improvement, not only in the system, but improvement of just even setting the objectives itself. So just as a sort of reflection pause, before we dive into the rest of the webinar, I ask of you in the class here to sort of read these questions and just contemplate as we go down through this webinar, right? Which KPI consumes, or which objective consumes the most effort? Keep in mind that this big bucket, if you go to these water parks, they have this big bucket where water is pouring into this big bucket. There's actually a smaller little bucket off the side that's filling at the same time. And when that bucket fills, it tips over and rings the alarm bell, right? And the bell rings, all the kids come running. You know the deal, right? You know the deal. Everyone comes and they get splashed with all this water. But think of it as that this big bucket of water is like all the data that's going into and that you're collecting, right? It's this huge amount of data for various different KPIs. You're collecting bundles and bundles of water. But what really matters is not this big bucket, but it's a smaller little bucket off the side, right? That's going to ring the alarm bell and tell us that something is happening, something is important. And if we could collect just enough data to fill that small little bucket that rings the alarm bell, right? That gets the kids running. In this case, the alarm bell is to let us know that something in our system is not working well and we need to improve it, right? So our system must proactively be able to get us that information ahead of time. But if we don't ask, we don't get. It's like the old biblical adage, but if we don't ask, we don't get, right? So which KPIs are consuming the most effort? Which ones are actually creating value? When you're collecting the data, you're analyzing the data, you're trending it, you're presenting it in these bar graphs and pie charts and everything to leadership, is it actually creating value, right? Is effort and value the same thing? Or are the ones that create value different from the KPIs that actually take the most effort to collect the data and analyze and everything else? What behavior are your KPIs encouraging in your system? Domino's used to have the 30 minutes delivery of free. And in India recently when I went, they have these delivery services. It's just mind-boggling. I mean, I can order like two lemons And 7 minutes later, this person is at my door with two lemons in the hand. Just two lemons. There's no $35 minimum, nothing. Like I can order, like a little, like, 4 ounces or whatever of ginger or something, and it'll come to my doorstep. But what is happening is they're finding that while these people are rushing because they are encouraged, right? They're compensated based on how quickly they can fill the order and how many orders they can fill. It's creating a traffic burden in the city and also increasing the number of accidents and incidents on the roads because people are now whizzing through roads to get to the delivery quickly so they can take the next order and deliver that quickly and so on and so forth, right? And they're finding that the number of accident rates are going up. So what behavior is your metric encouraging? Sometimes you have a metric of zero something. And is the metric, if it's not set up correctly with the right culture supporting it, is it causing people to hide information and not report it rather than report the information? What decision is it supporting? Is it based on the risks within your system? Because then the data is telling you how well you're managing the risks or not. And the key question is, does it flow from the policy? Which policy? If you're ISO system, it's your QHSE policy or whatever so policy it may be, right? So please reflect on these. Think about this water little thing as we go through the rest of the webinar here. So we talk about this data explosion and dashboard trap, right? Where you're collecting all this data. And nowadays I hear everyone, like everywhere I go, everyone's like, oh, we have Power BI, we have Power BI, we have Power BI. And great, you have Power BI, right? We recently got some new softwares, and there's you use some ad software, it will give you data on it. You use some other software, it has its own metrics that's tracking data and giving you data on it. But is that data actually providing us value, right? So technology has made performance measurement easier than ever. You can just measure just about anything and everything. Data volumes, reporting requirements are continuing to grow, right? The data volume is growing because you have the ability to, it's like the old days, I think of when you had those old Kodak cameras, you had to put your film in there of 24 or 36 film. And people actually thought about, you know, taking a photograph. They didn't just randomly take photographs. They thought about, people would get dressed, they group together and they get this shot, everything right, then they'll take the photograph. And you won't even know if your photograph was good or not until you actually develop the photograph, right? So nowadays with digital cameras, people are taking like 12 photographs a second, like in a fraction of a second, you've got like a rapid shutter 12, and no one ever looks at those photographs again. They're just going in memory, and you've got like trillions and trillions of these photographs and no one is ever going to look at. But people really give no thought to the photographs that they're taking. And similarly, uh, leaders are facing information fatigue because there's so much data being thrown at them. I don't know if some of you may have been there on a recent webinar we ran some time ago on, like, reframing the management reviews and how you perform management reviews. Because what happens is you start presenting so much data to the management right at the start that within about 15 minutes you have lost them, because now they've got just, they've been fed so much data and so many dashboards and everything else. By the time you get to the end where you need decisions from them, they're pretty, the bandwidth is reduced a lot, right? So leaders face information fatigue, and sometimes these dashboards create a false sense of confidence. Now I have this lovely green lawn over here that's been mowed so beautifully, right? That's been mowed so beautifully. And what if we just look at that lawn, right? It looks fantastic. It looks green, it looks beautiful, it looks cut. But what we don't see are the weeds that may be there in that lawn, right? If we just look at the lawn, we don't know the weeds that are there in the lawn because everything is cut so nice, it looks so green and beautiful. And therefore the image is what I use to give you that image of, as a leadership, you're looking at the dashboard, it's showing you all the greens and the good stuff, but you might not identify the weed that's going to slowly spread and destroy your whole lawn before you even knew about it, right? Because the understanding often lags the data collection, and important signals often get buried beneath the reporting noise. So as parents, if you are parents, you may have already experienced this, the "are we there yet" phenomena, right? And so I bring in this image in the measurement paradox, where organizations accumulate metrics, but some do not retire them. Now, a lot of you on your car dashboard, you have this RPM indicator, right? I don't know how many of you actually look at this RPM indicator on your dashboard and actually use it on your car dashboard. Does anyone actually use the RPM indicator for anything useful when they're driving their vehicle, right? The answer, I'm guessing, except for maybe one odd person, is probably never. But we still have it there. Does it serve a purpose still? Does it serve a purpose still to give us an RP indicator, just give us a feel, oh, we are going fast because the needle is going up? Yes, Steve. But it had a purpose when you drove a stick shift. Now with automatic gears, it has lost its purpose. But when you had a stick shift, it had a purpose. And therefore, do we still need the RPM indicator is my point here. That is the first thing from that image there, right? But every KPI consumes attention. And we get more data, but more data is not always equal to more insight. More KPIs create complexity and obscures the signals. What are the kids interested in? All the kids want to know is, are we there yet? What they want to know is the ETA, right? They don't want to know what route you took, whether it was the scenic route, whether it was the highway. They don't need to know how much the traffic was on the highway. Though they don't need all that stuff at all. All they want to know is, are we there yet? Right? And therefore, when you ask the right question, the are we there yet, it will drive what data you're going to collect to give you them. And all the kids really care about is the ETA. All this other stuff you're getting on your dashboard, your GPS, and everything else is useless to them. All they want to know is the ETA, right? And therefore, measurement should support the decisions. So the question for you to thinking about is what percentage of your KPIs that you are collecting today directly influence decisions and actions within your management system, right? And you'll see even in the poll that you answered, you have said just that we do it, it helps us track and pass the audits, but it's not helping us make better decisions. And we'll talk about that approach towards the end of the webinar here on how we can address that aspect, right? But what percentage of KPIs directly influence decisions and actions? And this may be a question some of you have asked yourself sometimes, someone else has asked you, especially if you're in a leadership position, but how many objectives are enough, right? Some organizations have one objective, some have two, some have 20, some have 25. Some have where every department has their own objective. Some have where multiple departments are contributing to one objective. So how many objectives are enough? If you are an organization that has ISO standards, the ISO standards don't prescribe a certain best number of objectives, so to speak, right? So what are some of those warning signs that you've got too many? Is when leadership struggles to explain the top priorities. You're tracking so many things, but if you ask leadership, what's important to you, right? They should be able to tell you what's important to them because the data as that you're collecting and the information from the data is going to lead to those top priorities. But as the poll stated, different departments are pulling in different directions, right? So think about building a car, right? The engineering department wants a high power engine, but the design department says we can't build an engine that big because we can't fit it into the car. Someone else says, oh, the car should look so and so, but then the engineering says, but we can't because it won't be aerodynamic. Someone else wants something else, and then the customer wants something else. And if the objectives are not aligned to achieve what the organization wants to deliver, as well as what the customer wants, then you're going to have different departments pulling in different directions. So objectives, aside from good communication, which is always important, objectives is what brings alignment across the departments when they are set correctly, right? And sometimes getting rid of certain objectives actually helps bring more alignment. If you recall when Steve Jobs took over Apple when he was fired and then he came back and took over Apple, what did he do? The first thing he did was he axed like about 70% of the projects that they were already running on. And he said, we're only going to focus on these key 30% of the projects, right? I think it was around 4 or 5 of them that they were going to focus on. So he realigned the organization around a few objectives, so to speak, right? But when different departments are pulling in, when you have too many, what happens? Resources get spread thin because everyone is trying to get a little piece of the pie to meet their objective. Resources get spread thin, right? Progress feels slower than accepted. I always use the example of a rowing shell. And if everyone in the rowing shell is not pulling with the same intensity in the same direction, progress is going to feel slower than accepted. Everyone is working hard, but the results aren't moving. It's like you're stepping on the gas, but you're not in gear, right? And all you see is that RPM needle going up, but the car's not moving anywhere, right? The car's not moving anywhere. So smart working has to be added to hard work or hard working, right? You have to work hard and you have to work smart, and your objectives are what are going to allow you to work smart. So the real purpose of measurement, or when you set objectives, why are we measuring things? I use this graph here of, cholesterol, right? HDL, LDL, and triglycerides. But what are you doing? Why do we go and do our blood work every year? Because the data from our blood work year over year over year has a purpose, right? The purpose is to help us improve the decisions, whether they be our diet, our lifestyle, or whatever else it is, right? It improves learning, right? We measure things so we can learn from the data, again, to take a decision to help us improve. It supports improvement. It helps identify opportunities for improvement, and it helps improve performance. And if your goals, your objectives, your KPIs as they are set today are not meeting any of these requirements, or perhaps even all five, right? Then you should not be measuring it. It's no added value. No added value apart from maybe appeasing leadership or an auditor or something else, right? Activity is visible. That means something is happening all the time, but improvement is harder to discern. And therefore, we want to collect the data that will help us determine, are we improving or not improving, right? The objective must help the system to improve proactively, preferably. You don't want to be on the reactive side. You want to preferably improve proactively. So here's some examples of that activity versus improvement, right? So when you look at activity, what has happened? We closed all our kappas within 30 days or 90 days, or corrective actions, if you call them, right? Everyone 100% training completed. You go to audits, you'll see people, they have their whole training, CBT training, 100% of the training completed. I ask people, when was the last time you reviewed these training videos to ensure that they are still relevant? Do you have a cycle at which you review them? No. So 5 years, the same CBT training has been running. No one has determined whether the CBTs are still relevant or not. No one has determined whether the CBT is actually helping improve the skill set of the workers. They're just doing the drill because they have to show they did some training, right? Either to cover some liability, to cover an audit requirement or a customer requirement. So 100% of training completed. Audits are being conducted. I've seen organizations that actually track, are we completing our internal audits? Are the internal audits actually adding value is not being looked at. Just did we do our internal audit this year or not? Yes or no. We had to do a minimum of one. We did our one audit, check the box, right? Meetings are held on a regular basis. Yeah, we have an ops meeting. But is the ops meeting leading to anything useful? Perhaps not. Reports are being produced all the time, either auto-generated or as a dashboard on your Power BI, whatever it may be, right? So what we're really trying to determine, but is not where the kappas are closed, but has the recurrence of those non-conformities reduced over time. Then we know that our system is improving, right? And therefore, we should be tracking this information versus just this. Now, there's no harm in tracking your kappas closed, but you want to add to that, is it also helping us? Like, is the closing effective in helping us reduce recurrence? Has competence actually increased from the training that we are conducting? Do we need to relook at our training approach? Because some people don't learn well from CBTs. They learn better from hands-on. Maybe you need a mixed mode of training, right? Audits have been conducted, yes, but have risks actually reduced, right? Did the audit tell us whether risks in the system have actually reduced or not? And can we see that through other collaborating data as well, right? Because now we have customer audits happening outside of the internal audits. We have other stakeholder audits happening or inspections or whatever. And can we see a reduction in risk on these other platforms as well? Meetings are held, but have they led to improved decisions or not, right? And performance has improved or not? Yes, reports are being produced, but are we getting improved performance or not? So why objectives fail? Why objectives fail? And we have this economist Charles Goodhart, sorry, a quote from him, right, where he says, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And why is that? Because people optimize for the metric behaviorally, right? people optimize for the metric. I gave you the example of the food delivery, etc. Right? But people optimize for the metric. If you are asking them to do things quickly, quick is going to be their priority, right? So there's the objectives fail because there's behavioral consequences. Metrics are driving unintended behavior. If you want to reduce the non-conformities, great. But is it leading to people not speaking up? And I've seen times when organizations incentivize, um, I see organizations incentivize the lack or the non-conformities not being reported. How do they do that? They say, okay, the best department will get this price, right? And one of the criteria to be the best department is not to have any non-conformities in your department. So when things go wrong, people are not going to report it. When your safety metric is that we want to have zero recordables, right? Even when there's something that's potentially on the border of a recordable or not, we're going to err on the side of it not being reported and recorded, and we'll try and manipulate that scenario, right? So we don't have to report it sometimes. So metrics drive unintended behavior, but there's poor selection. Sometimes we're just focusing on the wrong problem. We're focusing on the wrong problem. It's because the problem was never clearly defined. The problem was never clearly defined, right? And therefore we are focusing on the wrong problem. We'll see it even in setting off of objectives and meetings. I've had clients, we've sat and they've had meeting after meeting after meeting, cannot reach agreement. And they say, Julius, we just can't reach agreement. I say, okay, what is the problem that we're trying to solve here? The meeting, of course, was being held to draft a new procedure. And I said, what's the purpose of this procedure? What do we want this procedure to enable us to achieve? And once we had alignment on what was the purpose of the procedure, we were able to get through that problem really quickly, right? So poor selection, weak alignment because objectives over time drift away from the strategy, including the policy changes, the strategy changes, the vision of the leadership changes, but the objectives don't realign with the new vision, right? The objectives don't realign with the new vision. Activity starts replacing outcomes. Activity starts replacing, like I said, if you just want 10 people in the seat versus productivity, you're going to start getting 10 people in the seat, but then you may not get productivity, right? And nobody challenges whether the objectives still matter. Just everything is like, here are the objectives, we met the objectives, great. And you'll see this year over year over year over year, organizations are tracking the same data without ever changing those objectives. Because the only way they see they can change the objective is they increase it, let's say, from like 95% to 96%. But if you're already running at 95% year over year, do you want to still continue monitoring that, or do you want to target something new in your organization that deserves attention, that deserves resources? Because once you start tracking that data, you're going to start planning for that data, you're going to align the resources for that data and so on, right, for that objective. So examples here again, right? And sort of tracking back to the slide from ahead, CAPAs closed on within time, right? So whatever that may be versus the effectiveness of corrective action. Low injury targets, reducing the reporting, like I told you. Leadership is worried about customer retention. However, the objective is focused on customer satisfaction. So you see that, you go to a car dealership, you buy a car and various other places now, right? You finish it and what does the agent say? You're going to receive a survey. Please give me a 10 on the survey. But how is that 10 on the survey giving that particular organization any inputs on whether their agents are performing well or not, right? There's no inputs on whether the agent is performing well or not. If you want to focus on customer retention, then your metric should be focused around customer retention. Customer satisfaction, you're only getting from those who are coming to you, but it's giving you no data on whether you're actually retaining customers or not, unless you start tracking that information, right? Measuring training instead of completion, instead of competency, we talked about this. And every metric that you set, every objective that you set sends a message. I'll talk in a second about why I have this image here, right? But employees always pay attention to what leaders measure, right? Employees always pay attention to what leaders measure. And while they're not my employees, my kids are always looking to me as a parent to see what am I doing, right? and they're learning from us. Our kids learn from us as the parents. We are their first role models, right? They see what we do, what the teachers do, and they tend to emulate what we do. So talking about safety, for example, but a focus on production and cost schedule, right? Is not. It's like the old thing, they used to say, tell your kids not to lie, and then some relative calls, and you're like, go tell them mommy or daddy's not at home. And what are you doing? You're telling them go lie to someone, whereas all the rest of the 90% of the time, you're like, don't lie, don't lie, don't lie, right? So it sends a wrong message then. Metrics shape performance, so people assume it is important. People focus their effort on that metric because that's their like leadership is asking for this, so it's important. So they start focusing their effort there. They adapt their behavior to that. Like if production cost schedule is keep on getting the bulk of the conversation, right? But safety gets one slide, then they're going to focus on production cost schedule. And there are many accidents that have happened in the world, major accidents I'm talking about, where you'll see this, that they have this great big imaging of safety, 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 but the focus is on the pressures on production and cost schedule, and that is prioritized, and safety slowly but surely takes a backseat, right? Because people adapt their behavior, they start taking those shortcuts because they're like, okay, I need to get this done, I need to get, and they start taking shortcuts. Teams optimize what gets measured, right? And the culture then begins to form around those signals. So I have this here sort of a jaywalking item, right? But if you go to a country and you see, no matter if you've been trained all your life never to jaywalk, you go to a country and you see everyone jaywalking, the walk signal is red, but you're like, okay, everyone's doing it, so I can do it also, right? And you just follow whatever the rest of the folks are doing. You're like, if they can do it, I can do it. And that culture then pervades through the organization, right? So especially as leadership, it's important. So another great example is I went to audit a facility recently. And at the facility, one of the notes from the previous audit was about the culture, right? That there's all this like waste around, like people are, it's a hot place, people are drinking water and then they just throw their empty plastic water bottles around without really disposing in the trash as needed. And as I walked around the facility, I was with the senior manager of the facility, right? And we are walking around, I see these water bottles. What I would expect is that the leadership bends down and picks up the water bottles wherever they see them. Because if people see that, right? If they see leadership picking up the water bill every time, they're like, this is important. They're not just talking about it, they're doing it. We should also do it, right? And then you, as a leader, can go to people and say, listen, I'm doing it. You should do it too. So in objectives, you all probably know this. I won't spend a huge amount of time, but just a minute or two, right? Is we talk about leading versus lagging indicators. And in your organization, you must have a blend of these, right? For your system, you must have a blend of them. What are the leading indicators? They help shape the future, right? They are a signal of future performance. That means something has not happened yet, but they're a signal of future performance. They help identify problem early, and this is where that proactiveness of your management system come from. So they support the prevention and intervention as needed, and they focus on drivers and conditions, right? And like we say, both matters. One helps you react, the other helps you prevent. So whether your operations, safety, environment, you want to always have a mix of leading and lagging indicators, right? Your lagging indicators help explain the past. And while it may not potentially, hopefully not, is not too late, like you don't have a non-conforming product gone out to a customer or a major incident or whatever, right? It gives you enough time to react to prevent something major from happening, right? But this is only going to come if you're measuring at the right interval. So apart from the data you're collecting, it's about measuring and analyzing at the right intervals. If you're measuring throughout the year, but only measure and analyze once a year, it's probably too late, right? Of course, some of this will come with experience. But your lagging indicators help measure past performance, confirm on what has already happened, support trend analysis and reporting, and focuses on outcomes and results, right? So like I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time over here, but I did want to just touch on it. So measuring culture and leadership cannot be measured directly, right? It is revealed through behavior. I talked about this, and what are those signals that include reporting and escalation of concerns. It's always a great thing when you see people talking about their concerns. That means they feel comfortable to talk about risks within the system. And as leadership, it's important that we encourage this, right? You see the signals, right? is when the culture is bad, you'll see repeat problems occurring. The same issues occur again and again because the leadership is not taking action to address them or asking why are we having these repeat occurrences. Participation improvement activities, employing willingness to challenge issues, leadership responsiveness to concerns. These are ways by which we can measure culture. And culture, you'll see as auditors, is going to get more important, especially with the 9001 2026 when it comes out towards the end of quarter 3 here, right? There's more addition of quality culture in there. And so as auditors, these are some of the signs and signals you have to tell you whether the culture is good or not. I've kept this slide in here so you're aware of it, why ISO requires objectives, right? It's to allow the organization and the management system as a whole to align with strategic priorities, to help the organization address risks and opportunities. Please see how the standard is set up. 4 is the context of the organization, right? 6.1 is risks and opportunities. And then 6.2 is where the objectives come because our objectives must help us identify whether we are actually addressing these risks and opportunities effectively or not, right? It helps focus our improvement efforts where they matter most. It creates a basis for performance evaluation training and drives continued improvement. And therefore, the clause for objectives actually requires, right, that they be reviewed and updated. They be reviewed and updated as needed. Further, you'll see objectives are set to allow us to achieve everything above. That is the clause 4, the clause 6.1, etc. Once we have set our objectives, then we determine can we make the resources available, etc. If we can't make the resources available, we reset the objectives. But going through this approach, starting from here and working our way down, helps us plan our objectives for the right things. Otherwise, what happens is you start setting your objectives based on available resources and start selling yourself short, essentially. Okay. But objectives have life cycles, and they should, right? You create them, monitor them, you review them. Where they reviewed, at least if nowhere else, they get reviewed in your management review. And in the management review is where they should be challenged. And we'll talk about that towards the end here, right? Is how do we challenge this? What are those questions we need to ask to challenge them? At the end of which you determine, do we want to renew these for the next cyclical period, whatever that may be, or is it time to retire these? Are we done with these, right? Do we want to retire or renew? But just like with everything else and with the circle of continual improvement, your objectives must go through this cyclical cycle as well, right? The objectives must go through the cycle. So before we go to the next section where we talk about some of those action items you can take, I'm going to run my poll number 3 here. Again, I'll leave it open for a minute and then we'll go forward. Okay. So thinking about your organization's measurement system today, having covered whatever we have covered so far, right? What do you see sort of as the biggest gap, right? What do you see as the biggest? Again, you can select one, you can select all that apply. So the poll's going up here. And again, this is one of Julius's wordy polls. Okay. As part of my continual improvement process, I'll try and make them concise for the next webinar. All right, I see the answers coming in. And by the way, these are all aspects, right, that we have worked with clients to help them address in our consulting efforts that we have run with clients in the past, right? So these are kind of like common issues that have come up as we worked with clients, in a consulting capacity. But I think the highest numbers here are leadership reviews data, but rarely drives decisions or actions, right? And sometimes leadership needs to be prompted on what is the decision that you're asking of them, right? They don't have time to come up with the question. You have to ask the question, they'll give you their decision or action on it, right? As leadership, we sometimes anticipate or expect leadership to come up with the best questions, and they should say, oh, why did the leadership not ask this question? Right? And the next two here, metrics don't connect clearly to strategy or risk, is also important. And you look at any great strategic plan, right? When you look at the strategic plan, when you see the leadership involved, you will see that connection between the strategic plan and the objectives that have been set. Because the objectives are set to enable the organization to achieve the vision that they have in their mind, right? And oftentimes it's because no one has explained clearly to leadership what is the purpose of these objectives. Someone has set them to meet an audit requirement, and we have just said, leadership, here's the objectives. They said, okay, great, let's start doing it, right? Because at that point, what do they care? They don't realize sometimes, no one has explained to them the value of the management system in actually helping them improve their organization. They just see it as another checkbox. We'll get a certificate, we'll move on, right? And then we don't have a consistent process for setting, reviewing, or retiring objectives. And we'll talk about this here shortly. We'll talk about this here shortly. So leadership's real challenge, right? Sort of switching the lens, if you may, is choosing what matters. And that's why sometimes we need the support of the rest of the organization or the middle management, or as you may call it, the upper management to tell us, what are those opportunities? Because every organization has more opportunities than resources. And while unintentional, I think it's great in that the word resources happen to be in a smaller font, right? Because it truly is so, right? You have so many opportunities, but you have slim resources. And all those opportunities, are going to come from various things. There'll be customer complaints, audit findings, business risks, improvement in strategic priorities. And oftentimes organizations are not even tracking these. There's no database where these opportunities are tracking. In good organizations, I've actually seen organizations that track all the opportunities. Every year they take a vote on what is the most important of what they want to do, right? And what are those questions they're asking when they're going to take a vote is, which are the few that will make the biggest difference, right? And once you've decided, the other question also is, can we support it with the required resources? Great to say we're going to do all this, but can I now provide the resources needed, right? And once you have asked it, is questioning those assumptions kind of and asking yourself, why did we choose this objective instead of the others? So every year they may choose two or three improvement opportunities, focus on them, hit it for the year, and then the next year they choose another three and so on, right? So now they can actually, rather than spreading their resources thin, they can actually assign a good number of resources to that particular opportunity to make sure that they hit it. But we ask you to use this sort of 4-question KPI test for your KPIs. Right? What is the purpose of the KPI that you have chosen? What's the purpose of the objective that you have chosen? If you stop measuring to it tomorrow, what information would you lose? Because that information is going to enable you to make a decision, right? And so you're asking yourself, why should we measure it even? What's the purpose? What's it going to enable us to improve in our system? And if you can't really answer this purpose question for the objective, then perhaps you need to choose something else. What is the decision, right? What value does this objective bring to the table, right? If no decision depends on it, why even collect it, right? If I'm just, okay, I get 100% training, but what decision am I going to take from it, right? How's it going to help me improve my system? Then perhaps you don't want to collect it. And when you set your objectives, oftentimes these are not considered, but you want to determine at that stage yourself, what are the unintended consequences, right? What behavior is this objective going to drive? If you set a sales objective to hit a certain number, people may hit the certain number, but then you start competing against each other, right? So where will people focus their effort? What shortcuts is it going to create? And if it's going to create shortcuts, is there something we can do to prevent those shortcuts? What unintended consequences could emerge? And I can tell you, with having worked with hundreds of companies, this question in setting objectives almost never gets asked, of what behavior, right? What are those unintended consequences? And what organizational objective does it support? Here it comes back to that aspect of connecting, and you just answered it in the poll, where you said that's one of the important things to us in our poll, right? Is we don't really have the metrics don't clearly connect to strategy or risk. And therefore, to ask yourself is when you set a KPI, when you set an objective, right? What organization objective or what part of the leadership's vision is this objective supporting? So it can tell the leadership, yeah, here we are, we're headed in the right direction. We're headed in the right direction. We're going to get there. This is, and when the leadership says, are we there yet? You're going to have the question for him. When the dashboard shows green, even in that, you'll be able to see those weeds over there. And your resources will actually be better used because now you're not collecting water in the big basket and the big bucket. You're collecting it in the small bucket. It's just the right amount of data to give you the information you need for that bell to ring timely so you can take the action you need, right? Which in the water park is those kids running to get wet. But then, when you have your management reviews, and I know we're coming up on time here, I run a little over than what I planned for, but I hope the information so far has been useful, right? But in your management reviews, what are the questions you must ask when you're reviewing the objectives? Is not only did we hit our objectives or not, that question always gets asked, right? That question always gets asked. But as a management team, if you are in the leadership or you're facilitating the management review, when you get to the slide on objectives, ask these questions. Is this objective still relevant to us? Is it still relevant to our management system? How do you know it's relevant? Is because it's helping you drive improvement to your management system, right? So is the objective still relevant? Question all the assumptions that you may have put together, right? In saying, okay, yeah, this is showing us green, but can we trust this green? Can we trust this green that we are seeing here, right? What are the assumptions that we might be making when we see the green over here, when we see that audits are completed? The assumption we might be making is because the audits are completed, we got all the risks in the audit report, right? And so everything is great because we did our audits and maybe there were no findings, right? So what's the assumptions? What are the consequences of continuing to maintain this objective? Review the opportunities at that time, including resetting the objective, choosing a new objective, and then of course voting on those options for improvement that you may have. And if you say we should retire some of the objectives, discuss at that point. Can we retire as objective? Can we set a new objective? Is there still value in us maintaining the objective, putting resources towards it, and so on? But make those management reviews a conversation to be had with leadership. It should never be just one-sided with a QHSE manager presenting to leadership. It should be a conversation that's had between the team members, right? Present at the management review. And sometimes people need a little prompting by asking good questions. When you ask good questions, you'll engage them in good discussion. So, to round off at the end, to sort of hone in on what we've been talking about, here are some industry examples of objectives that were changed. A weak objective was just focusing on first pass yield at 19%, or just focusing on 100% conforming product going out the door, which may give us no idea that, okay, we got 100% conformity, but gives us no idea on the process waste. It gives us no idea on the scrap created. It gives us no idea on totally how many non-conforming issues were there along the way, right? So you may want, like I said, the lagging leading indicators. So you may want, yeah, we did that, but also along with this objective, and there's no harm if you want to keep tracking that, is better objective, are we reducing process variation and rework? Are we reducing process variation rework? And you can start tracking that and now determining and then saying, okay, let's try and reduce it more and more and more, right? And I've seen organizations have great success when they use this approach, when they look at the symptomatic issues and they try to then start working on improving those areas. So closing 100% of supply corrective actions in 30 days. Perhaps the better objective is, can we reduce recurring supply non-conformities that create operational risk? And I'm not saying these are perfect. I'm not saying these are only objectives, just to give you an example. But reduce recordable injuries by 20%. Like I said, what's going to happen? People are going to stop reporting them in. Versus, can we reduce employee exposure to significant hazards? So how do we do that? We have to first track what is the exposure that employees have to significant hazards. Maybe there's an ergonomic study, maybe there's a hazard assessment done, including you create heat maps, you involve all the employees, and then you take measures to reduce the exposure to it. Right? You take measures to reduce the exposure to it. So in conclusion, measure what matters, not simply because it's easy to count, right? Oftentimes we have to report on something, so let's count what's easy. every metric influences behavior, whether intended or not, right? I see some questions in the chat and we'll talk about it here. More KPIs rarely create more insight, right? To sum up what we've been talking about, objectives should emerge from strategy, risk, and opportunity. It need not only come from there, you could have others as well. That's why we say should, right? But should emerge from strategies, risk, and opportunity. There's a purpose in why those ISO standards are laid out in the structure that they have been laid out, right? The way they have been laid out. And the purpose of measurement, if we can take this away, this is perhaps the most important thing for our learning, right? Is the purpose of measurement is not purely just to report on something. The measurement must lead to better decisions and improvements. And therefore, even in collecting data in the first place, you must ask yourself is what is the decision that we want to make here? When you're able to answer what is the decision that you want to make, it will lead you to collect the right data, the right amount of data, and spend the right amount of resources and time on collecting all that data. Right. So while I'm reading that comment in the chat, the question chat, I'm going to run poll number 4, and we have some more comments coming in here, right? So I'm running poll number 4. If you can take a minute or so to answer that, and I will, in the meantime, look at what we have in the chat here. So Nancy, looking at your comment, the I'm trying to recall the FDI's version of 2026 that I've read, but to my knowledge at least, it still captured the at planned intervals, right? And I think that companies fail to see the at planned intervals, and they read at planned intervals as either periodic, regular, or once a year, right? But I completely agree with you. Management reviews is as needed. You can do them every quarter. You don't even have, you can do just quarterly. You can do certain bullets of those management reviews, and other aspects of management reviews you might, assess more frequently at a monthly meeting if you have it as well. So it really depends on how you set up the management review to benefit your organization. But at planned intervals is what it should be, right? And you determine what those planned intervals work best for your organization. George says, George, doesn't the lack of specific metrics on the objectives make the objectives squishier? How do you know if you don't have a required quantitative level? So I agree with you, George. The objectives need to be quantified, right? And you have to have a starting point. So in the last slide there, we had sort of, if you may, better objectives, right? We had better objectives stated. Really speaking, those objectives, once you determine and refine what the objective is, then yes, you want to be able to put a measurable to it, right? So I'm not put a measurable on that yet, but you want to put a measurable to it and then start measuring it and then start improving on it, right? Sometimes you may not know what the best is. You may have to do like a industry study and see what's the industry benchmark for this metric, right? And for some metrics, there may or may not be an industry benchmark as well. So we've got a lot of responses for the end there. Primarily top responses, review current KPIs using the 4-question test. I hope that's going to be useful to you. Bring this topic to leadership or the management review. If you've not yet viewed our management review webinar and the other webinars we have, they're all on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. You can go and look at all the previous webinars as well, right? And then, of course, top answer here is assess how well objectives align to strategy and risk. And really, when you start setting those objectives so they are refined around a purpose, you will find that they're very, very useful. So I finally come to my question and answers. We're at the top of the hour, but I know some of you may have to drop off here quickly, but I really appreciate you all staying in the webinar for as long as you did, right? A copy of this presentation does go out, and I think you automatically also get a recording of the webinar that automatically gets sent out as well. But if any of you have questions, please reach out to Lisa. You can also email me. My email is going to be then the presentation, and of course, our team stands ready to help you whenever you call. But thank you very much for being here and have a great rest of your afternoon. Nancy, Satinder, George, Beth, I see a lot of familiar faces here. Thank you for joining in. Thank you, Barbara. Marcelo, thank you. Vanessa, thank you very much. Yes, yes, I think the PowerPoint will eventually get mailed out to everyone over here. Dhiren sir, thank you very much. Arvind, thanks for joining. Eduardo and Antonio, thank you very much.